Okay, Soti everyone, and welcome back to the weekly online Dhamma group with Venerable Dhamma, who is joining us from Sri Lanka. Today we will continue with the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, the Discourse by Mahasi Sayadaw. And before we start, we will take together the 5 precepts. So everyone is welcome to join us in taking the 5 precepts and read along, or if you know it by heart, to just recite it with us. Is there anyone in the Discord who would like to lead the precepts for us today?
I would like to.
Thank you, Sanda.
Ahang bante ti saranena saha pancha silani yachami. Dutiyampi ahang bante ti saranena saha pancha silani yachami. Tatiyampi ahang bante ti saranena saha pancha silani yachami.
Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa.
Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa.
Buddhang saranang gacchami.
Buddhang saranang gacchami.
Dhammang saranang gacchami.
Dhammang saranang gacchami.
Sanghang saranang gacchami.
Sanghang saranang gacchami.
Dutiyampi buddhang saranang gacchami.
Dutiyampi buddhang saranang gacchami.
Dutiyampi dhammang saranang gacchami.
Dutiyampi dhammang saranang gacchami.
Dutiyampi sanghang saranang gacchami.
Dutiyampi sanghang saranang gacchami.
Tatiyampi buddhang saranang gacchami.
Tatiyampi buddhang saranang gacchami.
Tatiyampi dhammang saranang gacchami.
Tatiyampi dhammang saranang gacchami.
Tatiyampi sanghang saranang gacchami.
Tatiyampi sanghang saranang gacchami.
Isaranagammanang nithitang.
Ama bante.
Arnatipata veramani sikkhapadang samadhiyami.
Panatipata veramani sikkhapadang samadhiyami.
Adinnādāna veramani sikkhapadang samadhiyami.
Adinnādāna veramani sikkhapadang samadhiyami.
Kāmesu micchācārā veramani sikkhapadang samadhiyami.
Kāmesu micchācārā veramani sikkhapadang samadhiyami.
Musāvādā veramani sikkhapadang samadhiyami.
Musāvādā veramani sikkhapadang samadhiyami.
Surameraya majjappamaddatthāna veramani sikkhapadang samadhiyami.
Sura Amirayama Japama Datana Veramani Sika Padang Samadhiyami.
Imani pancha sikha padani silena sugating yanti silena bhoga sampada silena nibuting yanti tasma silang visodhaye.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. So we are going to continue now. And before we start reading, remember please to read each two paragraphs, but I think at this point every reader knows that. And just a quick recap that currently the Buddha arrived at Isipatana and is talking to the 5 ascetics he previously who were his companions during his search for enlightenment, and they finally accepted that he indeed became a Buddha, and we are about to approach his discourse where he gives his first sermon. I hope I got that correctly. So, Zibitsu, do you want to start for us today?
Yes. We now come to the recent past, introduced by the words, "Thus have I heard," which gives an account of how the Blessed One began to set in motion the wheel of Dhamma by giving the first sermon. The time was the evening of the full moon of Waso, 2,551 years ago, as counted back from this Burmese era, 1,324. The sun was about to set, but still visible as a bright red sphere. The moon, bright yellow, was just coming up in the eastern skies. The commentary on the Mahavaga Samyutta mentions that the first sermon was given while both the sun and the moon were simultaneously discernible in the sky.
Experienced that once on the full moon. I happened to be up on a mountain on the full moon, and I was sitting in meditation, and I looked to one side and there was the setting sun, and looked to the other side and there was the rising full moon. It was a remarkable coincidence.
The audience consisted of only the 5 bhikkhus from the human world, but the Brahmas numbered 18 crores, and the Devas, according to the Milinda Panha, innumerable. Thus, when the 5 bhikkhus, together with Brahmas and Devas, who were fortunate enough to hear the first sermon, were respectfully awaiting with rapt attention, the Blessed One began teaching the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta with the words, Dve me bhikkhave, anta pabajitena na sevitabha.
So the commentary seems to often exaggerate numbers, so we can't ever really tell how many it's actually likely were there. But this is a theme, and if you accept to some extent what the commentaries say about these sorts of things, then you have acknowledged that The number of devas and the number of brahmas even who studied the Buddha's teaching, listened to the Buddha's teaching, and practiced the Buddha's teaching were a great number. Don't be discouraged don't be dissuaded from heaven. It's not that we often are turned off by the idea of heaven because we're reminded by the Buddha that it's not the goal, but it is for most Buddhists in Asia a part of their path. At least the appreciation of the heavenly state, and it's throughout the Buddha's teachings as well. Don't discard the idea of taking heaven as a part of your journey, or practicing in such a way to go to heaven as part of your journey. It's not the goal, but something that, just like the many supportive factors, can be a support in your practice. I mean, why we can see how devas and brahmas are easily able to practice the teaching if they have the opportunity. The problem with heaven is quite often you don't get the opportunity. Now, that's not the case right now. There's many Buddhists in heaven, so don't be dissuaded or don't discard the idea of heaven. It should be considered a valuable part of one's practice. The Dhammas that allow us to continue on in a place, whether as a human or in heaven, where we're able to continue to practice the Dhamma into the future, assuming that we don't become enlightened as an arahant in this life, which for most people is the case. Obviously.
Bhante, just to clarify, 18 crores would be 180 million Brahmas.
I don't know what a crore is, but yeah, that sounds right.
Apparently it's 10 million, but maybe they meant something else.
So these Pali words are some of the most memorable of the Buddha's teaching for those who are immersed in the Buddha Sasana. So all of you if you haven't heard these words before, now you've heard the first teaching words of the Buddha, official teaching. The Buddha's first official teaching was this: Dve me bhikkhave anta pabajitena no sevitaba. So dve means two, me is actually a short of ime. So it's missing the e, which is common in Pali. They remove the vowels, just disappear because of what comes before. So dve me is dve ime, these two. And then bhikkhave is O monks. It's how you address people. Monks or bhikkhus, dve ime, these two anta, these two ends. Anta is a simple word, it just means end. So we always hear about the two extremes. The Buddha used a very simple word, simpler than the English word extreme, that just means end. Like ananta means endless. Something is ananta. The Buddha's guna, the Buddha's virtues are ananta, endless, without end. There are two ends, which you can... extreme is a fine word, it's a fine translation, but to be clear, it's not a grandiose word that the Buddha uses. It's just there's two ends, like extremes. It's the only way to say it. Two extremes, pabajitena, by a pabajita, by one who has gone forth, pajit, one who has left behind the world. Not sevitaba. They should not be sevita. Sevita means partaken in. So it's a word you can use for eating, I think, eating and drinking or consuming. But partaking, the Buddha, it's much more often used in a figurative sense, I think. I think you could call it a figurative sense of partaking, like you partake of people. Sevana jabalanang, don't partake or associate with foolish people. Uses the word sevitaba. So you shouldn't get caught up in or partake in these two anta, which is how we get the idea of the middle way. The Buddha is setting it up for, you have these two sides that are the ends, you know, and then you have the middle. But anta is just in contrast to the middle, the majjhima. Or majja is the middle. Veme bhikkhave anta papajitena na sevitaba. Words you should memorize. I don't know, they're not the most important words of the Buddha, but they're the first words. So the power of the religious power of having those words in your mind can be very reassuring, having memorized the first words of the Buddha. I mean, that really the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta is a sutta that Buddhists should memorize if you have the time and the interest. It's a good one to have in mind. And just for the confidence boost, you have memorized the ability to reverence and revere the Buddha's teaching whenever you want. You can recite it as reverence to the Buddha, even without getting into the meaning, before you even get into the meaning, which of course is the important part.
And it's always good to learn some Pali.
It'd be good for sure. I don't think you have to learn Pali, but there's value in it for sure.
Okay, the next paragraph. Bhikkhus, one who has gone forth from the worldly life, should not indulge in these two extreme parts, portions, shares, which will be presently explained. Ime tue anta.
Yeah, the word parts isn't in there, nor is portions or shares. I assume they're translating from the Burmese. The Pali is just the two extremes or the two ends. Here you see the anta, he's going to explain it. Oh, okay, so it does mean, anta could mean, yeah, kotasa bhaga.
It has many meanings.
Yeah, I don't know that it actually does. Interesting.
Venerable Siri Chandu, are you able to continue for us?
Yes. Here anta, according to the commentary interpretations, connotes grammatically kotasa or bhaga, which means share or portion or parts of things. But in view of the doctrine of the middle path taught later in the sermon, it is appropriate also to render anta as extreme or end. Again, part or portion of things. Should not be taken as any part or portion of things, but only those parts that lie on the two opposite ends or extremes of things. Hence our translation as two extreme parts or portions. The Sinhalese or Siamese commentaries render it as lamaka kotasa, meaning bad portion or part, somewhat similar to the old Burmese translation of bad thing or practice.
I don't know where they get that. I don't think grammatically is appropriate, but the commentary is not usually giving grammatical meanings. It's giving further explanation, because anta does really mean end. It also means intestine. And the idea there is that it's the end, at the end of your digestive system, you've got these tubes. So it's the bottom part of your body, the end part, ntang.
Thus it should be noted briefly first that one who has gone forth from the worldly life should not indulge in two extreme parts or practices.
Nobody should indulge in two extreme parts or practices, but what he's saying is someone who has made a determination, something better than worldly aspirations. That's the point. It doesn't have to be just monks. I mean, he's reframing spiritual life for these five ascetics. Remember, these guys have gone forth, his audience has gone forth, but us reading it, most of the people here being householders, you shouldn't read it in the same way, because you're a different audience. So this, for his audience, he was saying, you guys have this wrong. You've said, because their explanation of spiritual life was, you leave behind one extreme, the extreme of sensuality. You leave behind sensuality. That is what you do. Babajita, someone who has gone forth, should not engage in sensual clinging or craving or sensual desire, sensual pleasure. They said this. Everyone said this. In the time of the Buddha, before the Buddha, everyone said this. So they went to the other end and they said, this is proper for one who has gone forth. The Buddha is changing that. He's now saying, you're wrong. There are two extremes that those who have gone forth should not indulge in: sensual pleasure and self-torture. That's why he's saying it like this, Babajita, because it's been established that there is one extreme that you should not indulge in once you've gone forth, because it's the way of people who are not spiritual. People who are not interested in spirituality seek out sensual pleasure. This is the way of the world outside of those who are practicing proper spirituality. Now, the Buddha said for those who are practicing proper spirituality, there are actually two extremes. And it's important because of not only these five ascetics, but the prevailing attitude at the time among both the religious and non-religious, that those who are practicing religious should torture themselves. That's what they should do. So he had to address that. That's what this teaching is for. But absolutely take this as a reminder, which we generally do for all Buddhists, that one who is, not just one who has gone forth, but to the extent that you're interested in spirituality, you should give up the extremes of sensual pleasure and self-torture. And all that really means is stop seeking them out. Stop seeking out pleasure and stop seeking out pain. It doesn't mean don't experience pleasure. As we saw, the Buddha realized that pleasure could actually be profitable. The pleasure of the jhanas, the pleasure of samatha practice. And don't, on the other hand, don't run away from pain. And this is something that Buddhists often don't realize as well, that by the same token, giving up self-torture does not mean avoiding pain. Don't seek out pain is the only thing you have to do. Just stop hurting yourself on purpose. When you experience pain, valid. When you experience pleasure, valid. They're experiences. All you have to do to stay in the middle way is approach them properly. So really, the middle way is your approach, your perspective, or your approach to experiences, your attitude towards experiences, how you respond to experiences, not what you experience. When we hear about the extremes, it's not about changing your lifestyle or your behavior. No, it's about changing your attitude. You can still have pleasurable experiences, like you can have a bed that is pleasurable. When you lie down, it's pleasurable. But don't seek out that pleasure. Learn to confront the pleasure and see it clearly. And likewise, you don't have to stop experiencing pain. The Buddha said, don't torture yourself, so it doesn't mean find ways to avoid pain. So sitting against the wall, the Buddha said we shouldn't torture ourselves, so I'm going to sit against the wall because sitting up straight would give me pain. sitting cross-legged would give me pain, so I'll sit in a chair. That's not proper. Pain is perfectly valid, and it shouldn't be a reason not to do something. You shouldn't do something. You shouldn't stop doing something because it's painful. You just shouldn't say pain is my goal. Hurting yourself. I'm doing this to hurt myself, like physically hurt yourself or mentally hurt yourself. Torturing yourself, hating yourself, that sort of thing. That's all wrong. All of that is wrong. But doing something that gives you pain, the pain is not consequential. Pain is not a factor in whether you should or shouldn't do something, unless, of course, it becomes extreme. So it's not the pain, it's like injury. If something's going to injure you, well, injury is a factor to take into consideration, practically speaking. But pain and pleasure are just part of the reality of being a living being. And they're within the spectrum of those things that we can and should approach with mindfulness. Anyway, I'll let Mahasi Sayadaw do more of the talking.
Katamedwe yo chayang kamesu kamasu kali kanuyogo hino gamo potujaniko anario anatasamhito yo chayang atakilama tanuyogo duko anario anatasamhito.
So the key word here is yoga. Yoga means dedication. I guess you could translate it. It literally means being yoked. So in English we have this word yoke, not the egg yolk, the Y-O-K-E. So a yoke is the thing that you put on the back of the neck of an ox. And when the ox are free to roam and eat grass and enjoy their lives as ox. But when it comes time to do work, you put the yoke on them. And the yoke is attached to whatever's behind it, and they pull the yoke. They walk forward, and the yoke pulls behind it, whatever it is that they're pulling, a cart or a plow or that sort of thing. So even in English, we use this word, someone is yoked to a task. I don't know how much we use it, but I think it's a part of our dialogue to say you're yoked. We understand when someone is yoked to something. And I believe that's where the word yoga comes from. So this word is now a common word used just as mindfulness has become common in modern society. Yoga is something that people practice because in India the word yoga became... Well, the word yoga in Hinduism is because, I don't know the full history, but to some extent it's because there's something called... No, actually, I can't remember now, but yoga is a big word that they use before it became this stretching thing. Yoga, there's yoga, Kamma yoga, I guess there's
Yoga
3 yogas or
Sutras,
something, I
Bhante.
can't. Sorry?
You mean the Yoga Sutras? Or do you mean
No,
something
the word
different?
yoga, yoga as a concept was, it was dedication, was the idea. Work. It's often used to describe work. I believe it's where Yutta Dhammo comes from, my name. It's also from the root. Yuj is the root. Yeah, so here it means... the reason I pointed out is because it means dedication. So it's not that sensual pleasure is a problem. It's not that pain is a problem, but the yoga is a problem. And it's a word that seems to have already been in play at the time of the Buddha. So I guess probably the Upanishads were talking about it as well. Anyway, and it was probably part of the religious dialogue where they talked about yoga. What is your yoga? What is your dedication? And that somehow is transformed into stretching in modern times. But even people who practice yoga, modern day yoga, stretching, often understand that it has a bigger meaning in Hinduism. But in Indian religion, This was the idea, is the dedication to something. So if you're dedicated to these things, that's hino, gamo, potujaniko. Both of them are anaryo, noble, not arya. Atta sanghita. Atta means benefit, sanghita, connected. Anatta sanghita, they're not connected with any benefit, connected to any benefit. Useless.
What are the two extreme parts for practices? Delighting in desirable sense objects, one pursues sensuous pleasure, makes efforts to produce such pleasures, and enjoys them. This extreme part practice is low, bad, vulgar, being the habit of village and town folks, common to earthly, being indulged in by ordinary common worldlings, not clean, ignoble, hence not pursued by the noble ones, profitless, and not pertaining to the true interests one is seeking after. Such pursuit after sensuous pleasures is one extreme part practice which should be avoided.
Pleasurable sight, sound, smell, taste, and touch constitute desirable sense objects. Taking delight in such objects of pleasure and enjoying them physically and mentally, one pursues after these sensuous pleasures. This practice, which forms one extreme part, is low, vulgar, common, ignoble, and unprofitable, and should not be therefore followed by one who has gone forth from the worldly life. The other extreme part or practice, also which is concerned with attempts to inflict torture on oneself, can result only in suffering. Abstaining from food and clothing, which one is normally used to, is a form of self-torture and is unprofitable. Not being clean nor noble, this practice is not pursued by the noble ones, neither does it pertain to the true interests one is seeking after. Thus, practice of self-mortification, forming another extreme part or practice, should also be avoided. Avoiding these two extremes, one arrives at the true path known as the middle path.
Thus the Blessed One continued. Ete ko bhikkhave upo ante anupakama majjhima patipada atakantena abhisambuddha chak ukarani jnana karani upasamaya abhiññana sambo daya dibanya samvatati.
Anupagamma,
avoiding.
which you don't do. Anupagamma, and upagama, an is mean not. Upagama, upagama, it's not upagama, I think that's wrong. Let me just make sure here. Upagama, yeah, they've got that wrong. Let's find the sutta for a second.
You mean there shouldn't be a long A, Bante?
Yeah.
Yes. I also found it without the long A.
I even find the sutta. Anupagama is without the long. So I just point this out because the description of what not to do. Don't, and gam means to go, upa means to go towards. So don't approach these things. Practically, it translates. I mean, the idea that we have in regards to these things is to not take a step in the direction of these things. So the middle way is not about moderation. The middle way is not, there are middle ways that are kind of about moderation. There is a sense in some instances where moderation is a good thing, but that's not the middle way that the Buddha talked about. The middle way that the Buddha talked about is kind of a razor's edge, because the middle way is that moment where your mind is in a perfect state, and it's the moment of enlightenment. So until that moment, you're not actually on the path. You're veering off into one side or the other. So upagama means approach. Don't go in that direction. And if you get to the point where you're not going in either direction at all, that's when you're on the middle way. It's this very perfect state that is free from any kind of indulgence in sensual pleasure, like clinging to pleasure, craving for pleasure, and any kind of aversion towards pain or desire to cause harm. And they've got hyphens in the wrong place here, but just if you're interested, words that aren't going to be translated, I don't think, not correctly, or not literally anyway. But it's interesting to know the literal translation, because the Buddha said these. We've studied this, right? We studied the. Oh, well, we'll go over it again. The sutta, we actually did read the sutta before this, so we've gone through this all. But chakku karani, chakku means it brings, this middle way brings about chakku, the eye. Chakku means eye, but it brings about the Dhamma eye, not the physical eye, obviously. But the Buddha uses this term, calls it the eye that arises. Vision is how we translate it. That's what he's saying. Jnana means knowledge. Upasamaya means tranquility, tranquilizing the defilements. Abhinyaya, higher knowledge. And then sambodhaya. This should be sam plus bodha. Bodha means, that's where you get Buddha from, right? Sambodha means right self-awakening. Right awakening. Self-awakening. I don't know, awakening of self. One's own awakening. Leads to nibbana.
Bhante, I wish to, I guess, ask or mention something. So we were talking about there was about like pleasurable sounds, sight, smell, taste, touch. Those are related to good karma, right? Like wholesome resultants, basically. So you can't navigate. I mean, you can't control it to happen.
It's also a good point that don't think that we're trying to avoid these things purposefully, and don't think that the more you practice, the less you're going to have of these things. It's not like that. It's more likely that the more you practice, the more pleasurable experiences over time, the more pleasurable experiences you're going to acquire, because as a part of doing meditation practice, you're going to become a better person. In a worldly, conventional sense, you're going to be kinder, more generous, more ethical, more moral. And all of that good karma, good punya, is going to have good result, positive resultant in this life and the next, which is why heaven is quite likely for those who are dedicated to the Buddha's teaching, and not something that should be shied away from by any means. But there is the caveat, of course, that, yeah, they are wholesome resultant, but they're not wholesome, obviously. And that's important because it can be a very quick and likely source of the arising of unwholesomeness. You have wholesomeness leads to pleasure, and then you like the pleasure and crave for it, and that's unwholesomeness. So it's why we bounce around. So it's important to be vigilant with pleasure, and to understand that as a result of practice, you're likely to experience more and more pleasure over time, and it's something that you have to be vigilant with. I mean, not in any kind of desperate sense, but in order to, it's not evil. It's not like you're a wicked person because you enjoy it, but it causes your practice to stall and prevents you from finding future happiness and peace. So it allows for the arising of unwholesomeness, and will lead eventually to the arising of greater and greater suffering.
Yes, thank
If you're
you.
not mindful of the pleasure.
Bhikkhus, avoiding these two extreme parts, the Blessed One had gained the supreme knowledge of the middle path, which produces vision, produces knowledge, and leads to tranquility, stilling of defilements, higher knowledge, and nibbana, the end of all suffering.
They didn't translate Sambodhaya, I don't think so. Sambodha is, I think, Sambodhi, a term that's usually just reserved for the Buddha, I think, but I mean, it means enlightenment or awakening, self-awakening, meaning your own awakening.
Delaware, is it my turn to read?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Avoiding the two extremes, rejecting wrong paths, the middle path is reached. Walking this true path, enlightenment is gained, nibbana realized. How the middle path, which is also known as the Eightfold Path, produces vision, produces knowledge and how it leads to tranquility and enlightenment will be dealt with in our sermon next week.
So I don't think we're stopping quite here, but just to be clear, this is the uncut version of this discourse, and it's not a discourse; it's a book that was composed of discourses that the Mahasi Sayadaw gave over a series of weeks, and I think there's value in reading even the next paragraph, giving us a sense of what it was like to listen to the Mahasi Sayadaw and how a monk gives a Dhamma talk. I think this set of lines that were just read is in Burmese. I don't think it's coming from the Pali, and it's, I think, a common, I'm not very familiar with Burmese Buddhism, but I think it's common for them to have these sort of stanzas that they recite. They've memorized it. This would be something that might even rhyme. I don't know, I'm just guessing. But it's the kind of thing that they have memorized, and then they have this say. As Mahasi Sayadaw has a few of these throughout the book, where there are things that, like a quote that some Burmese teacher came up with. I'm kind of not sure about this. We have a Burmese person in our group who can maybe enlighten us on this, but I think this is one of those cases. Anyway, it's something, it seems at the end of the Dhamma talk he says this. I don't know if that has any relation, but and he ends the talk with the next paragraph, which we can read, but I think we're still have a little bit of time to continue on.
Should we skip these parts and go?
Oh no, go ahead. We should read that. We should read it because this is something Mahasi Sayadaw would have said to his audience, so we can get a sense of what it would have been like to have been in his audience, and how he, as a great Burmese teacher, taught and ended a talk.
Okay. May you all good people present in this audience, with virtue of having given respectful attention to this great discourse on the turning of the wheel of the Dhamma, together with its introductions, be able to avoid the wrong path, namely the two extremes, and follow the noble eightfold middle path, thereby gaining vision and higher knowledge, which will soon lead to the realization of Nibbana, the end of all sufferings. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
Shibitsu, you would be the next reader again.
It's interesting. This isn't all that common in my experience to find teachers. I mean, I guess in Burma it probably is, but Myanmar it probably is, but where you have someone who gives talk week after week on the same topic, going through a sutta week after week. I don't know if this was just a thing with Mahasi Sayadaw, but it probably was common in Myanmar. That's something I've met with very often. I did know this monk, and there's this monk in Bangkok who gave a talk on one sutta of the Majjhima Nikaya, and he went through the entire Majjhima Nikaya, one talk, one sutta, one talk. And I had his CDs back when CDs were a thing, and I would listen to one talk a day, one sutta a day, and it was really good. He was a really good teacher until he got to the one point where, for some reason, his explanation made him decide to start going off on how terrible the Mahasi Sayadaw was, or how Burmese Vipassana is, because I think he was Dhammayut in Thailand. So he started going off how wrong it was. It was about reporting, how wrong it is to do reporting and this sort of thing. The Buddha never did reporting, like meeting with and he was kind of derisive towards this whole tradition. And I just gave up after that. But it's like something to think about. These are the sorts of things that should be undertaken. Monks should give talks on suttas and sets of suttas to give these kinds of resources. I'm doing it with the Dhammapada, but the thing about the Dhammapada is it's not very deep for the most part. I mean, there's some deep verses, but it's not the Dhamma aspect is not very deep or detailed. It's just a verse, and then you can explain the verse in very deep ways. But some of the verses are speaking to basic teachings, and it's much more about the stories than anything. Like if you were to, the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta is a great example. But we should have a teacher in English. I don't know if there's anyone in English who did the whole Majjhima Nikaya sutta by sutta. Bhikkhu Bodhi did, no? But he's a pretty scholarly monk. He's not exactly a meditation teacher, I don't think.
Bante,
We've gone through
I
Majjhima
remember.
Nikaya as a group, right?
Yes. I remember bhikkhus going to Venerable Kassapa or Venerable Sariputta or even Ananda for clarifications and all that. Doesn't that is kind of a reporting or kind of a, because it wasn't just I remember, I think it was Anuruddha. We went to Sariputta and told him about his issues in the meditation practice too. So that could be considered as a reporting, no?
There's lots of examples. I'll explain it, but like the basic example that you can give is for the period after the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta. There was 5 days. 5 days, I think. There's a number of days. I think it's 5. After the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, before the Buddha taught the Anattalakkana Sutta, because they weren't all Sotapanna at that point. So between the time of the two suttas, the Buddha spent his time teaching the other 4 monks, because Kondanya had already become a Sotapanna. So the Buddha and Kondanya went out for alms, and they brought food back enough for all 6 of them. And all 6 of them partook in food, and they all practiced meditation, but the 4 of them, who were still Putujana, had to meet with the Buddha, and the Buddha had to ask them questions and answer their questions. And it says it explains in the commentary that there had to be this interaction, which you would call reporting. But the problem that this monk had, and monks in Thailand often have, is the word that they use is not reporting. Reporting, I think, is a pretty good word and easy to understand and not very controversial. But the word they use in Thailand is literally something like, how would you translate it as? Test your condition. Is that correct? Sop. Sop, because sop can mean something like sop. Is it sop? Sop. It can mean something like exam. So it's a test. But so this monk started going off on how can you test the meditators? What is this? Like you test them and they pass or they fail or something like that. Like it's a test. How do you test the meditator? He just didn't understand because he misunderstood the term. But the testing the condition, you can't even translate it that way because it comes from the word sop tam. Sop tam means investigate and ask, right? Sop tam. That's just sop tam means when you ask questions to get to get information. So you can sop tam about something that you're not sure of or something that you don't know. something that you want to check. Sop tam. It's a polite way of saying tam, which means ask. So sop arom means sop tam, and a lot of Thai people are confused by this. So they say, well, "Who is this sop arom? I'm going to fail, right? You're testing me." It's just a word. Anyway, so it's actually a translation thing. It has nothing to do with any controversy over the word reporting or the idea of meeting with your students. It's just the term that this monk who should have known better and was clearly prejudiced that he had about this idea of this word, sop alom.
I understand. Thank you.
My teacher used to say "Lai ngan hai fong," which means report so I can hear. Report. Tell us your report, basically, in English. Literally, report your work for us to hear. But in English, it's something like, give us your report. Give us a report of your practice. Langan Haifeng. But it's actually, you can use Langan Haifeng outside of religious context. It's a very sort of brusque and terse way of saying report. I think you would say it in government, in a government office. Langan Haifeng. Langan. It's kind of a bit humorous, a bit of a teasing, but not quite. So you say, you treat the person as though they're a worker. And it's also a way of appreciating the work that they've done. The meditator is doing yoga, doing work. They're dedicated. They're yoga vachara. And so you tell them to report their work. It's a good way of phrasing it. Langan Haifeng. But soptam, because there's asking, the teacher will ask questions and the student will ask questions. Both are absolutely fundamental to learning the Dhamma, right? If you don't ask questions and you don't answer questions from your teacher, how could you possibly have any kind of interaction with your teacher whatsoever? And that's what it means. Soptam. I've had to actually explain that to Thai people on more than one occasion when I was teaching them. Like, what does it mean, Sabalom? What is this? I was scared of it. It sounds like an exam.
So what would be the Pali version of reporting?
It's a good question whether there actually, I don't know that there is a word.
I mean, I found a
Probably
few.
is a word for reporting, but do they actually use them? We could look and see the commentary between the two suttas, what it says about that activity, but it's mostly just teaching and following and listening to the teacher.
Should we stop here? We are almost at the hour and we are at chapter 2 now, at the beginning.
Good time. Good timing.
Okay. So then we will stop the reading for today. Thank you everyone who was reading. And now we will start with discussions and questions. So everyone on YouTube and on Discord is welcome to ask their questions. And you can also, if you want to say something about the text you found interesting, you can just mention that. You can turn on your mics. And yes. Bante, where you maybe, I mean, that's not really important maybe, but the Yoga Shastra, was that what you were looking for?
No.
No.
the Bhagavad Gita is where it was. That's what I'm thinking of. The 3 yogas. It's the Bhagavad Gita that popularized these. But this was before the Bhagavad Gita. The Bhagavad Gita is late. So even before the Bhagavad Gita, this was an idea. Karma yoga, jnana yoga, and bhakti yoga. Bhakti yoga is quite common. It just means faith, where people have faith in God and devotion to God. So they'll often pick a god like Ganesh, the elephant god, or Krishna, of course, is the main one, sort of thing. Karma is action. Karma yoga, and jnana yoga is, I don't know. Anyway, it's their idea of religion. Just pointing out that the word yoga was used in religious context at the time.
Oh, so you mean in contrast to what most people know today about yoga, like the sports? Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, the Upanishads. No, they're still late. So this sort of idea came later, but yoga was a word that was used.
Bante, did you know how it become like stretching and all that?
It's because
Exercise.
I think it's because it has to do with karma yoga. So karma yoga gets shortened to yoga because when you dedicate yourself to it, it becomes yoga. So there would be these teachers in India who taught them yoga, taught them how to dedicate themselves, a type of dedication. It's just a short for karma yoga, I think. Again, I'm not very up on it, but the point is that the word yoga has deeper meaning than in modern usage, really.
By the way, Bante, I don't know if you saw it. Kiki, the one from our member from Burma, wrote in the chat that yes, it's traditionally how a Sayadaw would say at the end of the session, how they would end their discourse.
I think that's pronounced Jai, isn't it? I don't know how you pronounce it. It's not Ki. Jai, I think.
Okay,
Burmese writing is...
That's good to know.
Yeah, so that's how we would end the talk. Here we are. Atako Bhagava Adavasese Bhikkhu Niharabhato Dhammacakkappavattana. So here's what it says about Dhammacakkappavattana Ovadi Anusasi. Ovadi means he Chichi. Ovadi means to teach, I guess, give advice, admonish. Anusasani is to teach. I believe it's the commentary that goes into more detail about it. Makes it sound like they're doing actually a question and answer.
Bhante, may we ask the first question? The question is, Bhante, what's the problem with pleasure? Cooking good food for somebody, I think of that as a good thing. Or making music, that can be empowering. So what am I missing? Am I missing the stickiness of liking and wanting?
There's no problem with pleasure. I thought I made that pretty clear. But the things you're talking about are not just pleasure, they're enjoyment, liking of the pleasure. And yeah, liking is a problem. Pleasure is something that comes or goes as it will. But when you seek it out, for yourself or for others, you are engaging in liking yourself and encouraging others in the practice of liking, and liking is a problem. But no, there's no problem with pleasure.
But the text said that avoiding pleasure. So my question was like, how do you avoid such a thing? Like it's not under your control.
Text says pleasure where? Avoiding pleasure where?
Avoiding, yes.
Where? Like the text we were reading?
Yeah, it is. It said avoiding pleasure.
So that's not correct practice. Pursuit after sensuous pleasures should be avoided, not sensuous pleasure. He says such pursuit after sensual pleasures is one extreme which should be avoided. Not sensual pleasures.
So the pursuit.
Yes. Just like the pursuit of torture. Pain is not something to be avoided either, but pursuit of pain is to be avoided. And to be clear, the only way to do that is not to say I'm not going to. The only way to do that is to be mindful, because if you're not mindful, there will always be pursuit of both pleasure and pain. You'll do things that hurt yourself and do things that bring you pleasure because you want them.
That's much clearer. Thank you.
I think I found the part where it talks about in the commentary, Ime sanchapana bhikkhunaṁ kammathanesu. So during their kammatthana, this is what Lumpo Chodok alerted me to this. He explains this because someone was asking him, criticizing him for the idea of sop arom, this idea of reporting. Even in his time, this was a weird thing that Thai people thought was just not the Buddhist teaching. So here he says, in their kammatthana, in their meditations, upanamala visodanatang, for the purpose of purifying purifying the stains, which means working out the kinks or the wrinkles, or purifying the impurities that had arisen. But yeah, actually, it's not just the kinks; it's also the defilements. So when defilements arose in their mind, for the purpose of purifying those mala means stain or mala means directly rust, impurity, stain, rust. Yeah. the Bhagava, the Blessed One, stayed. So he didn't go on alms round. He stayed in. He stayed in the vihara, and on the first day, I think just Kondanya went, something like that. Upanupane kamatana mali. So it's, this isn't actually defilements. When there arose defilements of the kamatana, which means it can be the upakilesa, so they might see bright lights or this sort of thing that distract them from the practice, distract them from the mindfulness, or they might be distracted by thoughts or something like that. Doubt, it could be any of the hindrances. Having taken that opportunity, akasa, what is akasa? Understand? Kantva, having gone. He would go to them. He would go to their kuti. He would fly through the air. He would be sitting cross-legged in his kuti or his place in the forest, and he would fly through the air to find them and say, "Hey." And he would malang vino desi. He would dispel the defilements. There's Pakka, I don't know Pakka here. Something about on the 5th day. Yeah, so it doesn't actually talk about the question and answer idea, but it does say the Buddha had to go to them individually, which is the point, really. The point of reporting is something beyond what many teachers in other traditions stick to, which is group talks. So the only interaction teachers in some traditions have with their students is in a group. The teacher gets up, gives a talk about the Dhamma, maybe there's question and answer after, I guess, but there's no individual discussion, individual meeting, which is the essence of reporting. It's not about who asks what, it's about the meeting, which of course then entails asking and pointing things out and this sort of thing. But that's what he was making clear here, is that even with the first 5 monks, the Buddha had to do this, had to go individually to each student. So this idea of meeting individual is, as we know in our tradition, essential and crucial and incredibly valuable as a part of one's practice. I mean, what would we do if we didn't have these daily meetings, right? How would our students ever find the progress that they find without these daily interviews or reporting sessions, meeting sessions with the teacher, to have an opportunity to ask the teacher questions and for the teacher to ask questions of the students? It's essential. It's an essential part of our practice in our tradition. That has its roots in this practice that the Buddha undertook between the first 2 discourses for those 5 days, going individually to each monk to clear up any problems they might have.
The next question, Bhante. My friend paid a veterinarian to neuter his dog. Surely this goes against the precept regarding sexual misconduct. What is the karmic footprint of this act? How much of it falls on my friend versus the veterinarian?
I think you've wildly misunderstood the precept on sexual misconduct. The precept on sexual misconduct means not committing adultery, not engaging with basically not engaging in any intercourse that would break a trust. That would be considered improper. So yeah, that's a good way of putting it. So if someone is married or even is already in an exclusive relationship with someone else, or if you are exclusively in relationship with someone and have an extramarital affair or that sort of thing, that's what is meant by sexual misconduct. It has nothing to do with neutering your dog. And neutering your dog, is that karmically? I don't even think that's necessarily karmically unwholesome. Probably it's difficult to technically do it without any unwholesomeness, but it's not appreciably evil. There's value to it because animals don't understand and aren't able to. I mean, in the wild, it doesn't have this problem, but domesticated animals are in a bind where they're in a situation where it's not appropriate for them to have children. But how do you tell an animal it's not appropriate to have children? I mean, oftentimes it's not appropriate. So I don't think there's anything against. I mean, I might be wrong, and I don't have a text to back this up, but I don't think there's anything particularly wrong with neutering a pet. It's not like having an abortion or something. There's nothing dying. There's no being dying as a result, so it's nothing like that. It's not sexual misconduct by any means.
Ante, the next question. I have a question regarding making correct decisions. Should I try to face my fears to learn about it? Or is trying to face your fears to become free of it just another form of clinging?
Sorry, I'm going to pull up the stream so I can read these questions. Facing is a word that I use a lot. I think it's a very useful word to describe what we do in the practice of mindfulness. So if you're asking about facing your fears, I think that's a great thing to do with things like fear, is to face it. But you're onto something there about facing your fear to become free from it as being a bit of a problem or a form of clinging. Because yes, what we mean by facing isn't what people normally mean by facing. So when people say face your fears, they mean go out of your way to do things that'll trigger fear. That's not facing. That's not what is meant by facing. That's not accurate. It's not accurate to say that that's facing. Facing means facing that which is in front of you, right? Not avoiding it, not shying away. When confronted with something, don't go like this. Don't run away. And also don't fight it, just face it. So we get the wrong idea. We say, I should face my fear, and that's correct. But we're not talking usually about facing it. We're talking about, seeking it out. You say, okay, I want to face it. Well, it's not here. Then how do I face it? I have to seek it out. And that's where you go wrong. Because that's craving and clinging. It's related to craving because I want to force this interaction so I can get a result. That's wrong. That's not facing. You should face that desire, face that concern about your fear, that sort of thing. Desire to be free from fear, face that. But when you have fear, when the fear arises, absolutely, that's when you should face it. And you should face it. Mindfulness is about facing it. There's the Pali term, visaya bimukha bhava. Visaya Bimukha Sambhava. The Sambhava of Sati, what is Sambhava? I can't remember. Or the duty of Sati or something is to face your experiences. The role of Sati.
Ante, on the topic of the extreme of torture, I'm not sure if Mahasi Sayadaw talks in this discourse about it, but how would you differentiate? And I know there's a big difference, but I cannot really explain it. How to differentiate between the extreme of torture or the kinds of practices that were done in that during that time, and between the Dhutangas.
So the Dhutangas are not purposefully causing pain, is the point. It's a clear difference. You're not doing any of the Dhutangas to bring about painful feelings. You're doing them to challenge yourself. If those of you who don't know what a Dhutanga is, the Dhutangas, Dhuta Anga, I don't know exactly what it refers to grammatically, but they are ascetic practices, they're called. They are challenges one undertakes optionally as a Buddhist monk, usually. Or lay people can keep them as well, but usually as a Buddhist monk. So things like eating only one meal a day, which the Buddha enjoined. Anyone who's not eating one meal a day, the Buddha said, I eat one meal a day, you should eat one meal a day. So if you're not doing that as a monk, there's nothing radical about it, is what I'm saying. But some of them are radical, like not sleeping, not lying down. So some monks will undertake to stay only in walking and sitting. Some will do it for days, weeks, months. In the time of the Buddha, this was a thing where they would do it for even months at a time, never lying down. Now that's extreme, but it's not seeking out pain, right? You're not doing it saying, oh, this will make me feel pain and that will be a good thing. Like, how some people, when they get angry, they hit themselves or they bang their head against the wall because they're just crazy, crazy with anger. So they cause themselves pain or obviously cause other people pain. Some people pull their hair out, they're so stressed. This is the sort of thing that, this is a basic example of self-torture. So in the time of the Buddha, people would do that as a religious practice, often because they were unable to face lust, greed, desire. And so as a way of preventing themselves from having to face the desires, go to the other extreme. Anytime you have desire, pull your hair out. They would actually pull their hair out as a practice. Stop eating, because then you wouldn't have the energy to get lustful or have desire.
But what the Buddha
like one of the Dhutangas is just being content with whatever dwelling whatever dwelling you're given, never choosing where to stay. Being content with yata santikanga, I think is what it's called. Whatever you're given, be content with that. That's a Dhuttanga. Staying at the foot of a tree is a Dhuttanga, but you're not saying, oh, this will bring me pain. It might bring you pain, but that's not why you're doing it.
So could we say Dhuttanga is that which you do that only because it's the bare minimum, and the ascetic practices, the tapas practices, where they torture themselves, they go further and intentionally, I think you already said that, intentionally cause suffering. Okay.
And it's not even going further, it's just a whole different thing entirely. Your reason for doing it is different.
But what the Bodhisattva did when he almost starved himself, that wasn't usual, right? He went to beyond what was the usual limits, or not?
But the point was why he was doing it. He was doing it to torture himself, to create suffering.
Yeah. So then he even...
Because they had this idea that pleasure was wrong. And so if pleasure is wrong, pain must be right, is the idea, basically. The truth is that the Bodhisattva had bad karma that he had to expiate. Is that the word? Expiate. And so that's why he spent 6 years in wrong practice, because he had wrong view in a past life and said something very mean very disparaging to a Pacceka Buddha. And as a result, he was unable to see through the practice of self-torture. And so for 6 years he was practicing wrongly.
But it was also kind of a
bad karma.
Yeah, but also a good point maybe he made, that look how far I went, and even that didn't bring me what I was looking for. So
that's also true.
Okay, thank you, Bante.
But to be clear, it's not a matter of degree. It's just the intention. You're doing things to torture, to bring about pain. That's always wrong. If you're doing something to foster positive qualities, even the challenge is a huge core part of meditation, simply because challenge is an essential part of any training. If you're going to train yourself in sports, pick a sport. If you want to train in sports, you have to find a challenge. You have to do something to challenge yourself. Make it more and more challenging. If you want to lift weights, you have to keep adding weight. Everything is about challenge. Training is always about challenge. So many of the things you will do as a Buddhist meditator are challenging. And a part of that challenge is about facing pain. But another big challenge is facing pleasure. That's also a big challenge that you have to acknowledge as a challenge. There's no difference between facing pain or facing pleasure. They're both challenging. I mean, there's a difference, but quantitatively, I don't know. They're the same idea from the perspective of mindfulness. The idea is the same: challenge, to face without reacting.
Ante, the next question. I find the sentence, one who has gone forth from the worldly life, interesting, since doing that is not possible as long as you are manifested in this realm. Even saints are still worldly. Is this correct?
No, that's a misunderstanding. I mean, it's understandable, but it's just lack of understanding of what. It's a confusion over the meaning of words, which isn't your fault. I mean, it's just using words in different ways. So, by worldly, we mean limited to human and societal ambitions, let's say. I mean, it's kind of a vague idea, but it's one that is well known. So in English, we use the word secular life. It involves economic activity, materialism, political activity, social activity, these kinds of things. So giving up social activity, maybe not, but giving up politics, giving up economy, giving up property, giving up worldly stuff. So it's not not living in the world, it's worldly, which means things that only relate to human. I don't even know. It's so vague, things that relate to, because the idea comes from the difference between earth and heaven, right? So in theistic religions, there's stuff that relates to heaven and stuff that relates to earth. And that's sort of where the idea comes from. It comes from outside of Buddhism. If you make that distinction, you can clearly see how a theist would make the distinction. So is gold and money have nothing to do with heaven. You can't buy your way to heaven, right? Possessions, even family and friends and relatives, politics, society, ambitions and goals, jobs and careers, all of these things are what is meant by worldly. So a Buddhist gives up all of that, and they don't have to stop doing all of it, but they give it up as a goal, as an ambition. Meaning, so non-monastic Buddhists can also give these things up in the sense of giving them up as a goal. So living simply, having a job, but only for the purpose of preserving your life, for the purpose of continuing to cultivate the Buddhist teaching.
The next question, Bhante. When meditation practice gets matured, one's life gets better and becomes peaceful. So, if the meditator is liking this better life, is it unwholesome? Does it lead to attachment?
You have to understand what is meant by meditation practice getting matured. In this tradition, meditation practice getting matured, which it does lead to one's life getting better and becoming more peaceful, is the abandoning of attachment, the abandoning of liking. So you can't get mature and then like it, because it's in the definition of mature. What you're alluding to is the whole point of why true maturity involves giving up liking. And the way it works is you see that the things that you like are not worth liking. Or more generally, more exactly, you recognize that nothing is worth liking. Liking is not a worthy response to experience. You see that experiences are all impermanent, suffering, and non-self. Impermanent, unsatisfying, uncontrollable. And that's enough for you to stop liking them. So what you're talking about is an idea of liking a better life. A meditator who is mature would never have that, because they would have clear awareness that a better life is not a thing that exists in the first place. So the liking of it only comes, it comes from most meditators, because meditators are of various levels of maturity, but it comes from things like conceit, where you believe, I am good now. Look at this life is good, this thing I have is good. So you become proud of it. You become excited about your attainments. But what truly exists is the pleasant feelings. There will be pleasant feelings because of the peace that you've gained. There will be the pleasure of having done good deeds and knowing that you've done good deeds. And there will even be the pleasure of realizing that you have made some level of attainment in your practice. It's one's level of maturity that prevents one, or let's put it this way, it's one's maturity, spiritual maturity, which allows one to see clearly that those pleasures are not worth liking. So if liking arises, it means lack of maturity, and that's all. It's just a process, a learning process. It means one more thing that you have yet to learn to see clearly as not being worth liking.
Bante, the next question. Are you saying to do not look for pleasure and let it come by itself? It is confusing to me. So, don't play the guitar because that would be pleasurable. Am I understanding this correctly?
I mean, not quite, but you're kind of on the right track. Playing the guitar isn't a problem, but playing the guitar for the purpose of experiencing pleasure, I mean, it's not the problem, but it is a problem. The problem is that when you get that pleasure, you like it. So, and why you like it is because of your whole attitude. Why are you playing guitar? To experience pleasure. Why? Because you want to give rise to the liking of the pleasure. So it's really not possible to say, I'm going to play guitar, but I won't like the pleasure that comes from playing the guitar, or so on. The only real problem is the wanting. The main problem is the wanting, but the wanting is supported by your outlook, your perspective. If you go into it thinking, I will do this and it will give me this result, and when that result comes, you're going to like it. But it's supported by your attitude. It can be supported by views. If you have the view, pleasure is good, liking is good, then then you're much more likely going to like it, obviously. And as a result of the liking, there will be problems. It's not really about what you do. You could practice, you could play guitar mindfully. You could. You absolutely could, but it's not the reason why people play guitar. Why would you? Why would you rely on a guitar to practice mindfulness? There's no sense in it. It's too complicated. And it's obviously too dangerous, Not likely that someone is going to be able to be very mindful if they like playing guitar. Play guitar. This is why we do very simple, banal things which people don't like and which are not pleasant and fun and exciting. We tell you to walk back and forth and sit still with your legs crossed. Not very fun things to do. But that's valuable because it's much less likely to give rise to liking.
The next question, Bante. During walking meditation, If a distraction comes after lifting, what should I do? Should I discard all of it because it's not walking? Should I note the distraction right then and there? Or should I finish the sequence of stopping and noting it? Because then the issue is that it's gone.
So in walking, you only have to note things if they are significant distractions, or stray thoughts, or brief experiences. You can just bring the mind back to the foot and keep walking. If it distracts you, you stop walking, put your feet together, say stopping, stopping, and then you note it until it goes away. But if it's not something that's of a significant distraction, in walking meditation particularly, you can just bring the mind back to the foot and keep walking.
Bante, the next question. Are we really supposed to only watch experiences arise and pass away as we note them? If so, how can we ever learn from our mistakes and become more skillful in our actions and intentions?
If you're truly watching your experiences, you don't make mistakes. But our practice is not a straight path. And so there's much going on that isn't just watching experiences, and all that relates to making mistakes and learning from your mistakes. I mean, that's all happening by itself anyway. But once you get to the point of just watching experiences arise and cease, your mind is pure and you're enlightened. Because only an enlightened being can do that. But up to that point, you're making mistakes. At that point, there's no more making mistakes. I mean, that's one way to put it, but even then, there are processes of processing experience and interpreting experiences that go on, even in an arahant. Obviously, otherwise you couldn't interact. The Buddha couldn't have put things, he couldn't have come up with similes, and he couldn't have actually talked to people without using conventions. And so even an enlightened being can learn from mistakes because they can still make mistakes, but none of these are actually mistakes. They are still able to watch experiences, and that activity of watching experiences includes talking and acting and speaking and learning. You can do something wrong and say, oh, I did this wrong. But it's not a true mistake because there's no greed, anger, or delusion involved in it. There's no true mistakes. An arahant doesn't make any true mistakes, but conventionally they seem to make mistakes. In other words, they can call someone by the wrong name, say, oh, so-and-so, and then realize, oh, that's not your name. They can trip and fall, or they can eat something that is too spicy when they're allergic to hot spice. They can still make mistakes, but they're not real mistakes. And still learn from them, even while they're watching experience, because the mind, they're also watching the mind process the experiences. Honestly, I mean, even if you were to talk about any type of mistake, they can still process it, because that processing happens by itself, and they're watching it happen. They're mindful as that's happening.
Bante, the next question. Should we set the anger in us free so that it can free us through mindfulness?
So there is no anger in you. It's not bottled up. It's not something that you would set free. I mean, you learn this through the practice of mindfulness. You learn what's really going on. I mean, this sort of question is valuable because it opens the door for understanding the nature of reality. The answers to your question, and its complicated answer, lie in the practice of mindfulness to see what's really going on. You don't actually have anger bottled up at all. There's a process that occurs. It's a habitual process, so it occurs again and again and again. In some people, it occurs quite frequently. Through the practice of mindfulness, that process changes. Anger is something that is very quick to change. And through the practice of mindfulness, can be greatly ameliorated, made better, fixed. But to some extent, it's easier. I mean, in some sense, it's easier to fix anger than it is greed. Anger is quick to change. Greed is slow to change. As the Buddha said, my teacher pointed this out because of how the Buddha phrased it. He said, akodano sadasado. No, abhyapano, having no ill will. Sadasato, always being mindful. Abhijja vinaye sikang. No sadasato. Ajjatang susamahito, be internally composed. Abhijja vinaye sikang, and then he says, training oneself out of craving. This is what it means to be appamada. Appamada is a core Buddhist principle of being vigilant or not negligent. How the Buddha described his practice, the practice he taught. Be vigilant. There are 4 qualities. One is to just not have ill will. So it's something that you can theoretically just give up, through being mindful. You just don't get angry. Don't stop getting angry, stop hating people, stop holding grudges and all that. And it's, yes, easier said than done, but also easier done than is the practice of giving up craving. Because when he talks about the opposite of anger, which is greed, he says you train, vinaye sikang, you train to go out of it. As opposed to just saying, give it up. So that my teacher he pointed this out, he said, anger you can give up, but greed is something that you have to work at. You can't just give up anger, obviously, but more so than greed is the point. Greed is the deeper, sort of more pernicious one, mainly because it's pleasurable. This is why everyone's asking these questions. And to be clear, most Buddhists have greed. Even most Buddhist meditators still have greed. So it's not like we're condemning it or saying, hey, you want to come and practice. And this is the whole point of the Buddha's speech here. Give up anger. If you come here with anger in your heart, and if you come here angry, and if you come here and get angry, we're going to have a problem. So if you're practicing meditation and someone's making noise and you go and yell at them and say, hey, be quiet, we're going to have a problem, and we might not let you stay. I mean, we appreciate that people have anger and we allow them to have anger, but if it gets too bad, that might be a problem. But greed on the other hand, is what we're working on, and greed takes time. So, I don't know, I mean, greed and anger, they're both bad, but we have a sense that greed is the more difficult one. The one that it's understandable that people still have it. So if you're living in the household life and you want to play guitar, it's not going to ruin your spiritual practice. It's going to just taint it, pollute it to some degree. So you can still practice spirituality and play guitar, but The liking and the sensual enjoyment is just putting a damper on your spirituality, that's all. It means you're not 100%. Your engine is not running at 100% efficiency. Your spiritual engine is being inefficient. But no, setting anger free is not a real thing. What you would happen, if you had that idea of setting anger free, what would happen is when anger arose, you'd have some preconceived response that you'd perceive as being setting it free, whatever that is. And it can be different things. But what it is not is being mindful. So the correct answer, the correct statement that you should make is we should face the anger mindfully. And we do that by noting it. When you have anger, you remind yourself, this is anger. So you say to yourself, angry, angry. It's just reminding yourself, this is anger. Nothing more, nothing less. And with no further meaning making. Doesn't mean anything. There is no and so, or so what. There is no so what. It is anger, that's all. When you do that, you create clarity, you create equanimity, you create objectivity, and you free yourself from the reactivity of liking and disliking and so on. Free yourself from the whole chain of causation, what gets you into trouble. This leads to that, and that leads to this.
The next question, Bhante. Mahasi Sayadaw mentioned supermundane morality in his Satipatthana Vipassana meditation work. He said it is higher than the 5 precepts. What is this supermundane morality?
Supermundane morality particularly refers to the moment of enlightenment. At that moment, your mind is perfect. But we can even step back and talk about, let's say, path morality, because there are 2 paths. There's called the Pubanga Magga, the preliminary path, and the Arya Magga, the noble path. The preliminary path is what we're all on as we practice. When you practice walking and sitting, when you practice mindfulness at any time, you're on the Pubanga Magga. When you're going through the first of the 16 stages of knowledge up to the 11th stage of knowledge. 13, yeah, the 11th stage of knowledge. Up until the 11th stage of knowledge, that's our practice. So all of that is called the Pubanga Magga. Once you get beyond that, it's this moment of enlightenment, basically. It just means there's the experience of cessation. And in that moment, the mind is, of course, perfect. You can't get there without a mind that is perfect and pure. So that mind is considered to have supermundane morality. Not a very satisfactory explanation, though, because, well, it's kind of meaningless. At that point, there's nothing to be done. It's not something you can practice, not something you can work at. What we normally think of as the path is this preliminary path, the path of practice that we do day in and day out. And that practice path has also morality that is different from the 5 precepts. It's, you could say, the cultivation and the working towards that eventual perfect moment. But what that involves is moments of what are called virati. Virati means well, it means literally abstention, but it's a mental abstention. It's a mind state that doesn't want to do those things. When the opportunity to kill arises, if the mind is mindful, it will not want to kill. If the mind still wants to kill but stops killing, that relates to the 5 precepts. So the 5 precepts involve abstaining from killing when you want to kill. But a person who's on the path, who's practicing mindfulness, will have moments of mindfulness where an opportunity to kill arises. And normally the desire to kill would arise, but it doesn't arise. And it specifically doesn't arise because the mind is in a state of mindfulness. If it doesn't arise for other reasons, like you didn't realize it, maybe your attention was elsewhere, that's not what is meant by this, virati. Virati is when the desire to kill would have arisen, but doesn't arise specifically because of mindfulness. That's the Pubanga Magga virati cetasika that comes from mindfulness practice. When you get to the moment of enlightenment, that is perfect. So at that moment, it's unshakable, and it's kind of theoretical at that point because there's no interaction with things that you could kill or steal or lie or cheat anyway. The mind is absorbed at that point, but it's still considered to be ethical because of that absorption, because of that state of dedication or fixation on nibbana at that point. It's technically considered to be ethical. I think more useful for a practitioner is to talk about Pubanga Magga, the moments of mindfulness. And the mind is, of course, ethical and could never kill or steal or cheat or lie because of the mindfulness. You could say there's these three levels of morality. There's the conventional level of the precepts, there's the ultimate level of practice, and then there's the moment of enlightenment, which is supermundane morality. What Mahasi Sayadaw might have been talking about is the second one, because it's what leads to the supermundane state. You can call the Pubanga Magga being the practice of supermundane practice because it's the practice that leads to the supermundane state. So even though we call it the preliminary path, it is the path to enlightenment. So it can be said to be the supermundane path. In other words, it's the path leading to the supermundane. Just like we say the Bangkok path. We don't say that, but you could say something like the Bangkok path because it's the path to Bangkok. We do say we have the highway, the Los Angeles highway, Los Angeles freeway or something, because it's the freeway that not exactly, but you could say that because it's the freeway that leads to Los Angeles or something like that. The Pubanga Magga is the supermundane leading path, the path which leads to the supermundane.
Ante, the next question. What are some ways I can do virtuous actions?
Well, there are three basic virtuous actions you can do. The first is dana, which means charity. That can be material giving, sharing with others. That can be Dhamma, teaching or guidance. It can be helping others who need help, supporting them or aiding them, working for them, that sort of thing, donating your labor. And the second is sila, which means ethics, abstaining. So these are two sides of the coin. The things you do, things you can do that are good are charity and giving and sharing and kindness and thoughtfulness and so on. And then the other side is what you don't do. So if you give up killing and stealing and cheating and lying, drugs and alcohol, giving up that is ethics, and that's also a good thing, also a virtuous action. And the third is bhavana, which means development. So that's the practice of meditation. If you practice samatha meditation, if you practice vipassana meditation, those are also both virtuous deeds. Those three are the basics. There's actually 10 in total. I won't go into them, but if you want to look up the Punya Kiriyavatu, 10 of them. Starts with dana, sila, bhavana, and then there's 7 more, but they're all basically the same thing. Doing good things, abstaining from bad things, and purifying the mind through meditation. Those are the 3 types of good deeds.
Bhante, we've reached the end of our second hour. As always, we are so grateful for your wisdom and time and insight. And thank you so much for answering everyone's questions. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
Well, thank you all for coming out. Thank you for running the show. Subutsu, Delauer, Julie is there as well. Julie's behind the scenes, I think, doing all the work. I think someone is anyway. Whoever is,
Yes, she
thank
is.
you.
Yes.
I think Julie is. And all of those of you who came out to read and discuss, I hope that everyone felt comfortable interrupting the flow of the course, the flow of the reading, to ask their questions or to comment and everything. Those who did, I appreciate that. I think that's a valuable, important part of the group, not just the quick getting through the text, you know. If we get through this text too quick, we have to find another text. Not exactly, but if we're getting through it quick, then what was the point? It's just to get through it. This isn't a results. This is the learning that happens along the way. That's what it's all about. So appreciate that people are contributing their thoughts and their questions and discussion. That's what this is. That's what makes this a Dhamma group. I'm sorry that we're not opening the Dhamma group up to the public, but that would in many ways be a nightmare anyway. So if you want to join the Dhamma group, you have to do our at-home course at least, at-home meditation course. You have to be accomplished in the meditation tradition that we follow to get you on, to make sure that you're on the same page, that you're a part of our tradition and in harmony with the things that we teach and so on. If you've done that, you can join the Discord stage, come on stage and help us read and do lots of good. Because just think, you're using your voice to spread Mahasi Sayadaw's teachings, to spread the Buddha's teachings, the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta. You are doing that, all of you who are reading. It's a great wholesome thing that we're doing. This is the extension of the Buddha Dhamma. We are the tail end, we're the cutting edge, we're the Buddha is at the center, and how many years have gone by, we're the thread, we're the end of the thread, we're at the front. We're the connection between the Buddha and the future. The future will only have Buddhism because of things like this, continuing the thread on into the future. I appreciate that. And of course, those people who are asking questions on YouTube, you don't have to join YouTube, as I've said, as we've mentioned. You can just join our Discord server and you can watch on the stage. I think it's a good experience. It's a simple means of watching the Dhamma study as well. But YouTube is, of course, a huge audience, so watching it there is great as well, and we're picking up questions for there. All of you have asked questions. I appreciate that. I appreciate the patience and staying with the session, patience it takes to go through this sort of thing, because it's not really necessarily entertaining. It's not like we're telling jokes or singing songs or anything. So no matter what, no matter you enjoy it or not, it still takes patience to be here for an hour or 2 hours. Those of you who stayed 2 hours, that's real patience. No matter, not to say this was something bad, obviously, but hard to endure. No matter how good it is, it's still hard to endure. Sitting through a Dhamma discussion and Dhamma group for 2 hours. So great merit for that, just for the patience that it takes. Don't miss that. Don't overlook the value of just being here patiently and listening and appreciating the Dhamma. Even just the appreciation is great merit. So for all of this merit, and even just the merit of being here, may you continue to progress on the path. May all obstacles be dispelled, all external environmental obstacles and all the obstacles in your mind be overcome. May you be able to progress in the cultivation of ethics and concentration and wisdom. May the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha protect you on your path. May you succeed in creating the clarity that allows you to free yourself from greed, anger, and delusion. May all beings be free from suffering. May all beings find peace. For those of you here, may you all find the true value of the Buddha's teaching and attain freedom from suffering for yourselves. Sadhu.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
Sadhu, sadhu.
Thank you for the kind words, Bhante.